everyone, to an incredibly special episode of Burn the Talking Points. In fact, this is our first special episode. We have Governor Wes Moore giving his first in-depth remarks after the end of the legislative session. So we're not going to belabor the point, do a big intro, because I think everyone knows who Governor Wes Moore is. So I want to hop right into just what everyone's talking about right now, and that is the legislative session. So when you came into the legislative session this year, you were facing two massive challenges: the Trump administration and a structural deficit. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your team just approached all of these issues, knowing they were, in front of you, and also the uncertainty of the Trump administration?
Yeah, and it's wild because you had session start, you had a couple days later, we unveiled the budget, and then 5 days after that, you had the inauguration of Donald Trump, which everyone knew was going to be a storm. It has completely turned into a Cat 5 hurricane. The level of damage that the Trump administration has done on our values, on our constitutional rights, on all of our budgets, on the economy, has been staggering. And so we knew that there was a lot that had to happen and had to get done. But to see what has happened over the past 10 weeks, it just made our ability to really put our heads down and our ability to really work together to make hard choices, but get really big things done, that much more important and that much more prescient. And we came in knowing that the storm of fixing Maryland's business model, which is a really important one. We went over the process of, for the past decade, and actually I give a lot of credit to people like the Republican minority leader, who says this thing has been 10 years in the making. And I say to my Republican friends, you're right. This is long. This is a 10-year in the making problem that the previous administration did not tackle. And so we knew that we had to be able to come in and say, we're not going to kick the can down the road like it's done in the past, that we've got to fix this thing. That we saw that the biggest challenge was that we were spending as a state, but we weren't growing. Where in the 7 years before our administration came on board under the Hogan administration, you saw how spending increased by 70%, but GDP essentially remained flat. So that's what causes this structural deficit that has existed and had been predicted since 2017. And they had not done anything about it. And so I'm really grateful for the work that we were able to get done with the legislature, with Democrats in the House and the Senate, where we entered into session with around a $3.5 billion structural deficit. In one session, we were able to turn a $3.5 billion deficit into a structural surplus in one session, with over $300 million of a cash surplus. And by the way, still keeping 8% in the rainy day fund, which is above the recommended amount. And so showing that this is what fiscal discipline and good governance actually looks like. And because we're able to work in partnership. And, there is no doubt that a lot of tough decisions had to be made. I mean, we ended up, we ended up around $2.5 billion in cuts. It's the largest amount of cuts that we have seen in any Maryland budget in 16 years. So there were some really hard decisions that had to be made. But to say that, if I knew that we could have the largest amount of cuts in 16 years in Maryland's budget and still make historic investments in education, still make historic investments in things like public safety and childcare, still make historic investments in diversifying our economy and making sure that we're actually investing in new industries and growth industries. I'm really proud about what we were able to get done in a very complicated environment.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what's in the budget, but you said something that I feel like you were really nice about, but I don't have to be as nice about it. So I do want to talk about the structural deficit for a second, because I'm really frustrated with the idea that Larry Hogan somehow left you this pristine economy and this $5.5 billion surplus. Folks, that's not real. I just want to be really, really clear. First of all, that was Joe Biden's surplus. So thank you, Joe Biden.
That's right.
Plus, Larry Hogan spent down $2.5 billion of it at least already, and made a lot of promises on things that, let's just say, he was out the door and didn't really pay much mind to what he was doling out. And I will also say, you hit on this around this growth idea. Larry Hogan was famous for saying, open for business, right? Nothing. He didn't bring business here. There was nothing of that. And businesses didn't grow. Our GDP compared to Pennsylvania, compared to Virginia, compared to West Virginia, flatlined, where the nation as a whole was growing at like 13%, and we grew at 1%.
That's exactly right.
So, folks, you were very nice the way that you put it. I'm a partisan hack. I don't have to be nice about it. So, thank you, Joe Biden, for the surplus. That was not Larry Hogan's surplus, and sounds like you're going to be leaving a surplus after this budget.
That's right.
For the next budget here.
We actually have a real surplus, unlike, to your point, what Larry Hogan did not leave. And you're right. I mean, it is interesting that a person who really claimed to be a good businessman brought no business, and really
brought a lot of business for himself.
For himself. Hey, he personally did very well. But in terms of actually creating economic growth, that didn't happen. Maryland's economy under his watch grew at less than half of the national average. So there was no movement or momentum economically. And also you saw the consequences of it, of things like when we came on board, Maryland was 43rd in the country in unemployment, right? Maryland had not seen any real mechanisms of economic growth. Now in our first 2 years, Maryland went from 43rd in the country in unemployment to being one of the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country for 14 straight months. That we have
Can
now.
You say that again for the folks in the back?
That's right. We went from 43rd in the country in unemployment to going 14 straight months of amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. We have actually added more jobs in 2 years than Larry Hogan added in 8. In our first 2 years, we have added close to 100,000 new jobs in Maryland, private sector driven jobs. And that's more than Larry Hogan added in 8 years as the governor. And your point about the surplus piece is exactly right as well, where this myth of this $5-6 billion surplus, first of all, that's not real. The numbers are not real. There was a structural deficit. There was one-time cash that came from the Biden administration and from the Democratic Congress that went to every state around the country to deal with COVID. And when people say, well, even those a few $1 billion, where did that go? The answer is, where did it go? It dealt with things like Charlotte Hall, where we first came on board. The first day of the administration, we learned that we had a veterans home, the largest veterans home in our state, that was deeply neglecting our veterans. And we had to take surplus money to fix something that was a liability that we inherited. Where did it go? It went towards transportation, because we went 8 straight years of completely neglecting transportation, had roads and bridges falling apart, and had a transportation trust fund that essentially was wiped clean. And so we put money into transportation because you have to make it safe for people to go from where they live to where they work. Where did it go? It went towards education, because you had an administration who did not believe in funding public education in a real way, who did not believe in the tenets of the blueprint, early childhood education, career technical education, by being able to actually create career pathways for educators. And so we made historic investments in public education in our first days. And where did it go? It went to the rainy day fund. So when people say, well, where's the cash? Where's the surplus? The answer is, it's still there. It's sitting at 8% in the rainy day fund. And so you're absolutely right that the dark money gaslighting that is taking place, on the other side, is not just comical at times. It's just it's deeply dangerous when you're watching how, I guess, numbers and facts and math just do not seem to matter.
Yeah. So let's turn to the budget. You said largest cuts in 16 years, more than 2-to-1 cuts to revenues. What's in the budget? Yeah. I feel like I follow Annapolis somewhat closely, but it's hard for folks who are taking their kids to school, and then they have soccer practice, and then so can you just break it down in layman's terms for folks, like what is in this budget? What should they expect?
Yeah, I actually think there's 3 things that I think if people are going to take away anything from this budget, there's 3 things. One is, we said that we've got to reform the tax code. Maryland had a very, very antiquated tax code, and one where you had people, if a person was making $30 million a year, they were paying the same in taxes as a family making $300,000. So we said we've got to come up with a better way of being able to have a tax code that was fair, but also doing it that does not fall on the backs of middle-class families. And so we reformed the tax code. And so what are some things in there? It's included is that we actually reformed the tax code so that 94% of Marylanders are actually either getting a tax cut or seeing no changes in their income tax at all, right? 94% of Maryland. And the majority of Marylanders are getting a tax cut. Now, we are asking people who have done very, very well to pay a little bit more, and to pay a little bit more so we can invest in public education, to pay a little bit more so we can invest in having safe streets, so we can invest to make sure we have safe transportation. But when I say ask them to pay a little bit more, I mean, we have spoken with people all over the income spectrum in the state of Maryland. And I think there is a consensus that people thought it was fair that if someone's making over $750,000 a year, that it was fair to ask them to invest an additional $1,600 so we could be able to provide better resources for people in the state, and so that we could provide a little bit of a tax cut and a little bit of tax break to middle-class families. So that's the first thing, knowing that we reformed the tax code, but did not do it on the backs of middle-class families and actually are giving middle-class families a tax cut. Second thing is that we have to invest in industries, and in industries that we think have a unique chance of being able to grow and also diversifying off of Washington. One of the biggest things that we have seen with the introduction of this new Trump administration is that any government, any entity, any business model that relies on consistency, or in many cases sanity, of the White House this is a time you should really rethink your business model. Yeah. Because what we are seeing right now coming from Washington, D.C. is just complete chaos. It is laying off federal employees for absolutely no reason. It is trying to shutter federal agencies, in many cases unconstitutionally. It is saying that we are going to start trade wars, and we are going to, at the same time, completely erode people's retirements. When you're watching the stock markets go into a free fall, and thinking that going into a recession and also potential, downgrades of credit ratings is a good thing. So there is complete insanity and chaos going on in Washington, D.C., which meant we had to diversify our economy. But we have to make sure that our balance sheet shows that. If we're the home of IonQ and we're the home of the University of Maryland College Park, why are we not the global head of quantum? Why are we not if you have the work that Johns Hopkins is doing around AI, why are we not the global head of AI? Yeah. And so it really says, how do we take our balance sheet and invest in new industries that can grow our economy? Because as we mentioned before, the key to getting out of this stuff is one word: growth. And that's what was not being provided in the previous administration. And the third piece is that we both have to be able to control spend, and we did with some historic and difficult cuts in our budget, but also say, but that's not going to stop us from investing in our people. Mm-hmm. And so still investing in public education, still investing in healthcare and bringing the cost of prescription drugs down, still making sure we're investing in public safety and continuing the most rapid drop in violent crime that our state has seen literally in any time in recent history. The last time the homicide rates were this low in Baltimore City, I wasn't born yet.
It's amazing what city and state partnership does when you have a partner at the state who wants to work with.
That actually wants to partner. And that was the beauty. I think that, it's when I think about what happened in 2022 and the fact that we had at that point, a supermajority inside the General Assembly, the fact that we have an attorney general, a comptroller, a treasurer, that we had a governor, local elected officials, having new county executives that were all working together, you see that partnership actually produces progress and not gridlock, and not finger pointing, and not economies that have stalled. That we can actually buoy Maryland's prospects when you actually have people working together. So I'd say, again, so if people want to take three things away from a very complex budget, the first thing is that we reformed the tax code and didn't do it on the back of middle-class families. In fact, middle-class families just got a tax cut. The second thing is that we made sure that Maryland's economy is more competitive, and we're actually focusing on industry so we can grow our economy and diversify our economy. And the third thing is that we controlled spending and made really hard choices, but we did not compromise on investing in our people.
Well, appreciate that overview, and those three things sound like exactly what we should be doing. So I appreciate the leadership on that. And I want to talk a little bit more about the Trump administration, but before I do, the last question just on the end of session here is you have obviously as governor you have a lot of say, but the Senate has a say, the House of or delegates has a say. So you have partners in Speaker Jones and President Ferguson. Can you talk just a little bit about like how the need for that partnership and kind of how it works here in Annapolis?
It is it's such a breath of fresh air from what you're seeing in Washington, where we actually work together. And the ironic thing is that doesn't mean we always agree.
Right.
There are things that I will disagree with the Senate president or disagree with the speaker or things they disagree with me on. And that's okay. But that's why cooperation and communication matters in good governance. That this is not all saying we're going to start at the same place. And it might not even say in some cases, we're going to end at the same place. But these are my partners. I am theirs. And we actually work together. And that's actually what creates progress. And it is such, even though we are, 30 miles from Washington, D.C., you would think it's a world away. Where we are watching the chaos and the dysfunction of Washington, D.C., that this Trump administration has just completely inspired, that is having just such deep consequences on people all over this country and all over Marylanders. And so I love the fact that that we have a real organized and coordinated and thoughtful partnership with the leaders of the General Assembly, with the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, because I really do believe the partnership produces progress.
I mean, it's interesting what you said around Annapolis and DC are 30 miles away, but feel like a world apart. Yeah. I mean, if you tune in today, you're seeing Republican floor leaders for bills that get unanimous votes, and you see the speaker or you see committee chairs assigning Republicans to, manage a bill across the finish line that it's a Democratic bill. So
that's right.
It's interesting to see the difference. I will say I'm happy we have Democratic majorities here because the priorities are very different, but the collegiality is worlds apart.
And that's it too, right? The collegiality is worlds apart. And listen, one thing I actually give the Republicans some credit in this year, where earlier on they actually, instead of just saying here's what's wrong with what the governor presented or here's what's wrong with the House or the Senate version, they presented their own vision. Yeah. And I mean, I disagree with cutting Medicaid. Yeah. I disagree with telling children that they should not have health insurance. I disagree with many of the proposals they made. Cutting public education. But I actually respect the fact that they put it down on paper. So let's have that debate. Let's have a debate why actually we think we should invest in public education and not cut it. Yeah. Right? Let's debate the fact that I do not think it's good that we can have individuals and families who have no health insurance. But I'm actually grateful that they actually put something down and showed us their values. And to your point, I can deeply disagree, but I actually respect the fact that that the Republicans were actually willing to put that on paper.
I could not agree more. So let's turn to the federal government a little bit. Maryland, both you, the Attorney General, the General Assembly have been fighting back against the worst excesses of the Trump administration. What have you been seeing from the Trump administration that's really been impacting Maryland, and how are you fighting back?
Well, it's really interesting because you realize that they are not interested in governing. They're interested in destroying. And I say that because if you really wanted to address, for example, the issue of immigration, then actually what you should do, particularly because you have the Senate and the House, pass comprehensive immigration reform, because you actually have the votes to do that right now. Yeah. You have the votes to do something that people were calling for, people voted for, was something that was important on people's minds, and that you actually could probably even get some coordination, which in some cases, even from the Democratic side, saying, hey, some of these things make sense. Like, you actually have the power to do that.
Trump can bend the party to his will. So
100%.
If this was comprehensive immigration reform and it was some of the things that he wants, obviously we would disagree with probably large elements of it, but he could bend the Republican Party to his will.
100%. He could passed comprehensive immigration reform if the goal was saying that we have to get immigration reform done. But you know what he's doing? He's showing his hand. That's never what this was about. This was about xenophobia. It was about elections. It was about making people scared of the other. And so instead of doing things like working with the speaker and working with the majority leader, both of whom are Republicans right now, and putting together a comprehensive immigration reform package, what do? You weaponize ICE. You start pulling people without due process from their families and sending them to other countries. You do videos of people with their shirts off in prisons while you have your Secretary of Homeland Security standing in front of the prisons looking tough.
Wearing a Rolex watch also.
Wearing a Rolex watch. So this is actually not about governance. And it's actually not even about the problem. It's xenophobia and it's weaponization. And he's showing his hands. And so I think that, so when we talk about the things that he has done, that really, this has not been a successful legislative run for the president. Everything else that the president has done has been an executive order or executive action.
I think they might have renamed a post office or two.
They might have renamed the post office, right? But it's like, but even if you take a look at all those executive actions, they fall into 3 different categories, right? It's either ineffective, it's performative, or it is illegal. Those are the 3 buckets that all these executive actions have fallen under. And so I look at what has happened with this administration, and I see how you've taken these either ineffective, performative, or illegal actions that have done things like laying off thousands of Marylanders. And I see the very human impacts of this. Where I was at a job fair. We've been standing up these job fairs all over the state to try to take care of our federal workers. People whose job it was to make sure that our food is safe. People whose job it is to make sure that our critical infrastructure is protected. People whose job it is to make sure that our veterans can get a proper burial. And that veterans who need PTSD supports can actually get the supports that they need for injuries they sustained while they were fighting and protecting this country. And I was up in Frederick at a job fair, and I met a guy named Steve who told me he was a Republican and said that he still has not told his children he's been laid off. So every single morning he gets up and he puts on a suit so his kids see him in a suit when they go to school, because he doesn't know how to tell them that he doesn't have a job anymore. There are human impacts to what this president is doing. There's human impacts when just a few days ago, I was with a group of farmers from the Eastern Shore who have been farming land for over 100 years. And whether they were farmers who were focusing on things like barley or grapes or poultry, who are now saying because of these disastrous tariff policies that they're not sure if they're going to be able to keep their doors open. The chaos and the lack of thoughtfulness and the heartlessness, the cruelty that this administration has unleashed without a plan, except simply saying, light it on fire because I enjoy the feelings of flames, have had deep impacts on not just Maryland's economy, but on the people of the state. But that it's really important for the people of the state to know that, and I know as I say this collectively with all of our constitutional officers and our local leadership and the General Assembly, I learned in the military, when you get attacked, you don't just sit there and take it. You mobilize. And I've been really proud of the way that Maryland in this moment has mobilized to say we will protect our people against all challenges, foreign and domestic.
Yeah. That story about Steve got me. That's really depressing. We've seen these human impacts. I'm sure you've heard stories over and over and over again that folks like me with just only see on Twitter, only see on Facebook and things like that. So appreciate the work that you're doing and all of our constitutional officers are doing to try and look after the federal workers, because it's the phrase you said, like the cruelty is the point, sort of like Adam Sewer's book from the first administration. It's like the cruelty is the point on steroids. It's,
on steroids.
There's like a joy in the pain that's being caused.
That's right.
And people would rather see, own the libs than fix a problem.
That's exactly right. And you see how, because they don't see the impacts. I listened to, and I was so angry when I listened to the Commerce Secretary tell a story about how if his mother-in-law did not get a Social Security check, how she wouldn't complain. And he's worth, what, $8 billion. But the people who would are the vast majority of people who have paid into a system and who rely on that check, who've earned it. And so to see the carelessness and the heartlessness that they are approaching the basic fabric of community support, of good governance, and they're making it into a punchline is just so deeply un-American. And I'm just really glad that we're in Maryland.
I mean, with the markets tanking, the amount of people who are saying, money doesn't matter, or like, oh, who cares, seem to also be the people who have money. So
Exactly right. I mean, these are, when people look at the Dow collapsing, when people look at, the stock market collapsing, when people look at, the fact that the United States is going into a recession, if we're not there already. When people are looking at things like unemployment rates spiking up, people have to remember there are real human lives behind this. A stock market falling is not just about a number across a television screen. That's somebody's retirement.
Yeah.
They're relying on that money to make sure that them and their family was going to be okay. And they've worked hard for it.
Yes.
When you watch a recession and trade wars, and we were just at a Maryland institution that happens to sell guitars. But a Maryland institution that happens to sell guitars. And I was speaking with the founder, who's had this company now for decades, is literally the largest private employer in the county where it is, who was absolutely furious because he said that these tariffs that are being put in place are not just forcing him to have to think about how am I going to be able to make payroll. And these are employees that he cares about, people who've been working there for 10 and 15, 20 years, because essentially all of his margins have decreased. But anything in terms of being able to grow and expand and hire more people, that those prospects are now out the door because everything just got more expensive. So, I think this is a moment when we are realizing that that policy really does matter, and elections really do have consequences. And trust me, no matter what your problem is, Donald Trump was never interested in solving it. That's not why he ran. That his retribution was not for the pain and frustration you were feeling. It was about his own. It was very personal. And he is now using this moment to be able to address his pain by placing more pain on everyday people.
Yeah. So I have two other things I want to talk to you about before we play a game, because we play a lot of games here. One of them is around democratic messaging in general. The other is around your initiative with Men and Boys. At the State of the State address, you were the first governor nationwide to really highlight this issue of men and boys as a full government effort that needs intervention. You cited suicide rates, you cited the job market, you cited college attainment, you cited juvenile justice. And I don't, it's a big concept, so I don't have a very specific, answer this one question, but I want to talk about it in kind of two ways. I want to talk about it first around what you hope the state of Maryland will be able to do, but the other around this concept of red pilling. I'm not sure if you're familiar with red pilling.
Oh, yeah.
But for the audience, red pilling, it's from the Matrix. You take the blue pill, everything, stays great. You go back to sleep. Take the red pill, the truth is unveiled, and, everyone that's been
whatever it
lying
is.
to
Yep.
you is now you see.
Yep.
So this concept of red pilling is big on especially far right platforms. And as someone who watches the Maryland Democratic Party social media from the back end and can see friends and relatives slowly move down this red pilling spectrum, like it's really scary to watch it happen in real time. Like there's one person in particular who interacts with the Maryland Democratic Party account that has always been a hardcore conservative, but they're probably almost fully down the path to where like there some real life consequences could be there for this person and for this person and those that love him or her. So it's around this men and boys concept. 'Cause I'm quite sure it's a man as well. Can you talk to just a little bit about how you're viewing it and why you're so focused on it, and just how do we address the red pilling as part of it?
Yeah. It's a great question.
And also, I don't know the answer. I'm not sure anyone does know.
Yeah, and honestly, it's also a deeply personal question because I really came up in the consequences of broken policies, where I watched my father die when I was 3 because he didn't get the health care he needed, where I had handcuffs on my wrist by the time I was 11 because I came up in a community that was over policed and we knew it. That I joined the Army when I was 17 years old, was sent to military school by the time I was 13, went to a 2-year college, didn't have a traditional background. And the level of anger and frustration that I know I felt coming up, it was real. And I know it's also real for a lot of our young men and boys who feel that society has not been fair and society has not seen them. And I think when people look at things like election results, my point is that that's not the head, that's the tail. We've already lost them a long time ago. And you just have to look at the data to see that this is a long-standing challenge, that we have seen how, whether it's suicide rates, whether it's college attainment rates, a frustration that so many people feel, that the frustration that a lot of young men and boys feel about not just politics, but society is something that's justified. And the data continues to show how deep of a problem that it is. And so what we decided to do was we said, we are going to follow the data and we are going to take an all of government approach to be able to address something that is a very deep challenge that our society is facing. Because if you have a society that is consistently leaving young men and boys behind, you are not going to have a society that is growing. That we are really proud of a lot of the, and again, there's still work to be done when it comes to making sure we can continue pushing our young women and girls. But the fact is that the data showed 30 and 40 years ago that young women and girls were falling so far behind. And so there were real initiatives and pushes and investments to make sure we can get that number up. And the truth is that a lot of it was working and has worked, right? We're seeing everything from labor force participation for women up, college attainment, that women are doubling men now in higher education. So we're seeing how the fruits of the investments is working. We followed the data, we made investments, and you're starting to see the return on that investments. The challenge now is you're seeing the inverse for young boys. And so we just have to do the same thing. We have to make sure that we are continuing to invest in our women and make sure we start properly investing and figuring out what is going on with our young men and boys. In fact, we just had our cabinet. We have monthly cabinet meetings, and we had an entire focus in that was, what is everybody doing in your individual departments and agencies to make sure we are putting a lens on addressing the challenge of young men and boys. It's something that we have our entire performance cabinet now focusing on. And we really think that Maryland is going to be the state that's going to not just help to address this within our own state, and it's going to make our entire state better, but I think it's going to be a real national model about something that we've got to do, because those data trends that we're seeing in Maryland, unfortunately, we are seeing them across the country.
So last question before we play the game, and I'll make this one super quick because I know we're running short on time here. Democratic communications. Some people say we're doing terrible. Some people say we're doing really terrible. But, some people say we're doing great. I do think in the last week or two, I've felt the momentum shift, and I think you're starting to see people figure things out. is there anyone you think is doing particularly great and you're like, oh, I really like watching that? Or is there like a method that you're seeing like, hey, these types of videos are really hitting, I enjoy it? Like, how are you thinking about democratic communication?
I don't think that there's a singular way to look at it. I think what people are doing is they're all finding their power in unique ways. And I think that's fantastic. And whether for some people finding their power means we're going to go protest in front of a federal agency that they are trying to illegally close because they do not have the power to close the Department of Education, right? That's a constitutionally authorized department, so an executive order can't do that. And so people saying, we're going to go protest. That's awesome. They found their power. Whether it is watching what's happening on Capitol Hill and the way you're watching congressmen and senators, like watching Cory Booker stand there for 25 hours, just shutting the Senate down for 25 hours. Like, I love it. That was Congress finding their power. Whether it was our attorney general in the state of Maryland, who I think now is probably on his 40th lawsuit of the Trump administration, who's saying that my power is I'm going to make sure that everything that this administration does that is illegal or unconstitutional, we are going to legally challenge it and making sure we are keeping them in court. And we're grateful that the courts thus far, for the most part, have actually held up and put together the temporary restraining orders, the TROs and things like that, that are helping to make sure that, yes, the Constitution actually does matter. And so I love the fact that everybody is finding their voice, whatever it happens to be. And I think the big thing that we've got to continue showing in our state, it's just results. What happens when you actually can have a coordinated and unified government? What can happen when you're looking at everything from drops in the unemployment rate, drops in violent crime, being able to support federal workers, being able to actually make investments in transportation and housing and healthcare and things that actually matter in people's lives? We get things done. We show results. And so that's, I think, the thing that I'm really excited about is I don't think that there is a slogan or a certain pitch of our voice that we're going to do.
It'd be great if there was.
It'd be great if there was one slogan to say, this is the slogan, right? But I think the answer is that we just got to deliver results. And everybody in their own way has got to find their power. And I think you're right, though. Over these past few weeks, I think people are realizing we are not powerless. And we do not just have to sit there and curl in a fetal position and take it. We fight back and we mobilize.
Winning elections and overperforming in elections also.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So appreciate you being here. If you're willing to stay, we'd like to play a quick game with you. And we're calling this game Snap Decisions.
All right.
You are a governor, and as a governor, you get a ton of information thrown at you, and you have to make decisions incredibly quickly. So we are going to give you, I think, 14 athletes that are either from Maryland,
okay,
played at Maryland, or are a Maryland team.
Okay.
You need to pick your Mount Rushmore, but you only get 2 minutes, and you have to talk us through why you're picking from the list that we give you. Are you ready to hear
any sport?
Well, it's from this list.
Okay.
And if I miss someone, throw someone else in there.
Okay.
All right. You ready to hear who's on the list? And I'm going to hand them to you, and then you can go through them.
Okay.
And as soon as you get the last one, the clock starts.
Okay.
Right? So we have Kevin Durant.
KD. Okay.
We have Sugar Ray Leonard.
Oh, okay.
We have Ed Reed.
My guy. Okay.
We have Ray Lewis.
Jeez, these are hard.
We have Babe Ruth.
Oh, man. And this has to be a Mount, only 4.
Mount Rushmore is only 4. We have Brooks Robinson.
Okay.
Michael Phelps. Lamar Jackson.
Oh, my gosh.
Brenda Fries. Cal Ripken Jr.
Yeah. Yep.
Angel Reese.
God. Okay.
Jessica Long, the Paralympian.
Yes. Oh, she's awesome.
Katie Ledecky. Dominique Dawes.
Okay.
We had to throw a Washington player in. So Darryl Green.
Yep.
I'm a Ravens fan. So.
I am too.
Well, Packer fan. I'm also an owner of the team. But other than that, big Ravens fan. Johnny Unitas.
Jeez.
And Wes Moore. So the clock starts now. Talk us through your Mount Rushmore. Who you putting on? Who are you kicking off?
All right. As much as I would love that Wes Moore be on that list, Wes Moore is not going to be on that list. Okay. So let's go ahead and close that one out now. So this is hard, man, because I I almost feel like if you're going to pick a Mount Rushmore, you need to break it down by sport. And if you're going to have a basketball one, I love my guy KD, but actually I'm going to add one on here.
Okay.
I think the person who probably would have been, and I bet you KD would probably even say this, I think the person who probably would have been the greatest basketball player from the area is actually Len Bias.
Okay.
So Len Bias gets one of my faces.
Right. And I'm sure Kevin Durant watches this. So KD, let us know if you agree.
Yes. And I apologize, KD, if you disagree. If I got to pick one football player, I'm with you. I like Dale Green. He's great, but like we're going Maryland. We ain't going Washington. I say if we're going football, we got to go with Ray Lewis.
Okay.
Not just because he's
over Johnny Unitas.
Yeah, and the only reason why, actually, how many rings did Johnny have?
I don't know. I'm a Packer fan.
Yeah, I think Johnny had one, and I think Ray had two. So I'm going with the amount of rings. And listen, I'm a huge Lamar Jackson fan. I think Lamar's going to finish with more than
I think so too.
Than Ray. And he definitely should have been a third-time MVP this year. But you just can't deny. You can't deny.
Okay.
Ray. So far I'm going with Len
Bias and Ray Lewis.
Okay. I'm going with baseball is really damn hard.
I mean, these are your own self-imposed rules too. Just saying.
They are. I'm gonna go with. Listen, I love Cal. I almost think you got to go with Brooks, though.
Going Brooks?
Let's go Brooks.
Oh.
Go Brooks. I got one more.
You have one spot left. So we have.
Damn.
We have Brooks.
Brenda Freeze. GOAT. She's amazing. All right. You know who I got to go with?
I think I know who you're going to pick.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going Katie Ledecky.
That's not who I thought you were going to pick.
Yeah, I'm going Katie Ledecky.
I thought you were going to go Michael Phelps.
Michael definitely has. Michael has more medals. I think that Katie Ledecky, though, is someone who has helped to transform a sport.
Got it.
In a way that I think Michael Phelps was just absolutely the best of an era.
She has a crazy amount of world records, too.
Crazy amount of world records.
Doesn't she hold like the top 10 spots?
That's exactly right. And that's the difference. I think Michael Phelps was the most dominant over a period of time inside the sport. I think Katie Ledecky has helped to just completely change women's swimming.
That's fair.
And so I'm going Len Bias, Ray Lewis, Brooks Robinson, and Katie Ledecky.
That is a great Mount Rushmore. I'll say we got this idea because we heard you on our rival podcast, Jen Psaki's Blueprint, talking about sports. And so that was, we thought you'd have some interesting opinions on that.
But so. I tell you what, though, man. I mean, if you look at the people who didn't make the list, I think another interesting game is tell me another state that has options that are as good as these.
You should challenge your other governors to produce.
I think that's a damn good idea because I don't know how any of them are beating us. I mean, like this is actually ridiculous.
Yes. It's a hard list to choose from.
It really is. It really is.
Well, Mr. Governor, we appreciate you playing the game. We appreciate your thoughts on the session, on what's happening federally, and also some of the challenges we face in Democratic politics. I'm sure we will talk to you again in the future. We wish you well this summer, and then when we talk again, I'm sure there'll be a lot more news to talk about. So thank you for joining.
I hope so. And Joe, I appreciate you, man, and great leadership. Really appreciate you.
Appreciate
and this was fun.
Really great team here at the Maryland Democratic Party. Everyone, thank you for tuning in to Burn the Talking Points. This is a special episode. We're going to drop another special episode this week with Comptroller Learman, who's going to talk about the impacts of tariffs here on Maryland. And then stay tuned for our regular scheduled episodes every 2 weeks on Thursdays. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks, Sean.